Hello everybody and welcome to today's episode of Activist Lawyer. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Ciarán Mulholland in the studio today in Uri. Welcome, Ciarán.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Drove up from, where did you come from Dundalk today, or were you were away?
I drove up from, I came across, I was working in Sligo yesterday, so I came across from the west of Ireland and up from Dundalk this morning.
Well, you're very good for making that effort and joining us today. Just by way of introduction, Ciarán is Principal Solicitor at Mulholland Law in Dundalk and Dublin. You've offices in both Dundalk and Dublin. And it is a boutique Irish law firm specialising in criminal defence, civil litigation and extradition law. And just a little bit of background, Ciarán is one of the few Irish lawyers to hold membership of the prestigious European Criminal Bar Association and the European Fraud and Compliance Lawyers. Ciarán has represented clients before the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg and the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which ultimately contributed to his nomination for Criminal Lawyer of the Year at the annual Irish Law Awards. More recently, he was the winner of the Lawyer Monthly Legal Awards 2022 in the category of Human Rights Ireland. Ciarán read law with Irish at Magee College of the Ulster University, that's in Derry, right?
It is, yes.
And obtained a Masters of Laws from Queen's University, Belfast, focusing on human rights and criminal justice. Ciarán is an Irish language advocate and a GAA massive super fan, I would say.
So, massive GAA super fan, not so much a massive GAA player these days. But
now, which team's that?
Which team?
Not that I can tell
I've
from your attire.
More clubs than Dodie Dilfad these days. I've done the rounds with clubs with moving around the place. But I have been roped into playing a bit of reserve hurling.
Reserve hurling?
Reserve hurling. And it's a cross between Gladiators and Cena the Warrior Princess.
Wow.
So it's, thank God you have to wear your helmet now. Because I don't think I'd be getting in the court with many teeth.
Well, what a good way to release your frustration from.
There certainly has to be balance, given some of the tension that is built up during the course of the work.
I'm sure. Well, I'm delighted to have you here and really keen to get through some of your work. You're going to share a little bit of your work with us and with our listeners. But just going back in time a little bit, where did it all begin? Why did you get into law in the first place? What led you down that path?
I was only thinking about that last night. I attended the Bunskull in West Belfast, Bunskull Football Fellowship. Discrimination was prevalent in your everyday life. Not that you would have been live to it. It's such, and I vividly remember even the evenings, and with parents with teletext on, and was these images of courts.
Right.
And you could see the cartoons, and people talking about relatives, or because people were always glued to the TV. It could be a relative in court, or it was and like I always had an opinion, and I always had a voice. I was certainly drawn to law, and I was drawn to. I was very lucky with the schools that I attended, and teachers were credit when credit's due. They had an instrumental impact upon me. Anyone else in my family would have been not in terms of professionals. It's a career that I enjoy, and it's a career that I'm very passionate about.
Very good. And you've gone between, I suppose you're dual qualified, so you I don't recognise Brexit either. But feeling Brexit and putting Brexit to one side, you decided to go into, it was criminal law, it was criminal justice, the area that you wanted to get into, or how did you get into kind of, I suppose, the human?
And it's because it was, you could personally relate to it. I studied law, as I said. I read law with Irish language at Magee College in Derry City at a time in which you had tried. It was all exciting. It was all new, which made the studies then interesting. But my first job in law was actually voluntary work for a law centre in Derry doing employment cases.
Right.
And I then gravitated towards criminal law, and I think it was because of the evolution of the laws and how you could impact it, and I still do. I thoroughly enjoy it.
And then
the past in the north, there's lots of criminal defence firms, and there's some excellent lawyers in those areas. I didn't wake up one day and say, well, I'm going to go to Dublin. I want to work in Dublin. I was looking elsewhere. I was at one stage. I was out, hoping to secure employment in a firm in New York, and other things changed that course, and it was back in Ireland, and I was approached by a firm in Dublin, and they made an offer of a position down in Dublin, and in Dublin in the south they don't have the equivalent of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, or the Criminal Evidence Order, the right to legal representation, the role of a solicitor. This is all new territory.
Sure.
And solicitors were only permitted to attend interviews at that. So I like some of the interviews, like, no, it was frightening as well. No, it was some of the cases, it was like an episode of Love Hate. No, it really was, and people were thinking, oh, you practice in the North, you've saw it all. And going,
oh yeah,
absolutely.
Insight there. But you have been involved in advocating for change or witnessing solicitors to participate in, I hope I'm saying this right, the Supralat project. So that was dealing with, is it strengthening?
That was an excellent project. That was spearheaded by the late Vicky Conway.
Oh right, yes.
And look, it was just a breath of fresh air. There was academics from DCU, Vaughan, being things were wrong. It had to change. It was brought together. Now there was other involvement through Maastricht University and that as well, but it was because of the absence of legislation. Akin to PACE, which would establish this is the role of a criminal defence solicitor, this is the role of a member of Garda Síochána, their investigator, this is the role of a prosecutor, they present the case, but it goes right to the core of from the moment of arrest, how that person or that individual accused is brought through the system, and it was not only to educate but to give solicitors and practicing solicitors the confidence to deal with that, because ultimately what happened in the South overnight, after the Doyle case and the White and Gormley case in the Supreme Court, and that judgment of the late Adrian Hardiman, solicitors were permitted access to Garda interviews. No, so the solicitors would go, oh, now you can come into interviews.
Right, okay.
Okay, so what training was in place? There was no training. There was no training. So there was practitioners there, 20, 30 years experience, great advocates in court, but had never actually been in the Garda interview room. No, the height of their advice would be to call up, I suppose, like a welfare check.
Yeah.
And the run-of-the-mill advice was, like, exercise your constitutional right to silence. So it has dramatically changed how interviews are carried out in the South. But again, look, that was a brilliant course, and look, I was very privileged to participate in that.
That's brilliant. And are you still tutoring? I know you were tutoring with the Law Society. Is that still something you're...
The tutoring with the Law Society, so I was assisting with the criminal litigation course. Okay. And I that was great crack. Yeah. No, it really was. I really enjoyed that, because you're sitting down with other practitioners and aspiring practitioners, and like, they want to hear the juicy stories and that, and some of them are coming from corporate law firms, and they're very rigid in what they're doing, and they're hearing about this really exciting law, and then you tell them what the salaries are, and the faces just drop.
See you later.
You're saying, look, at this really is a vocation, and if it's maybe it was a vocation now, maybe it's just insanity now. If it was a vocation then, it's insanity now with the legal aid cuts.
Oh yeah. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it was I didn't do the classes last year, and it was just really because how time consuming they are. Yeah. Because it's not something that you can just show up.
It's a big commitment. No, absolutely.
No, you have to be up to scratch. You have to prepare for the classes, and when you are a sole practitioner, your diary changes so much.
You're pulled every which way as well.
And arrests can come in, cases can come out of nowhere and can be adjourned or can be listed. So, like, unfortunately, I didn't do it last year. It's something that I would really be hoping to come back to, because I'd say I probably get more out of it than what the students get out of it.
I'm sure you're a great asset as well to them, just getting your insight and your experience. I mean, we've had a little word about some of your cases. What does your desk look like at the moment, as they say? Is there anything you can share with us in terms of just your work, any cases that might stand out?
If you must know, my desk is...
very neat and tidy.
It is actually very neat and tidy, yeah. And if any of my staff are listening to this, they'll certainly confirm that I have to have a tidy desk policy or I'll go mad. Okay. But some of the cases that I have ongoing at the minute are some really interesting cases, one of which is listed next week. So that's a case again, and I've had a couple of cases, extradition cases that have I've had the fortune of going to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg on, and this is another one that, look, it may go there. I don't know. It's certainly before the Supreme Court at the minute, and it's focusing on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement.
Okay.
So that 11th-hour nightmare agreement that Boris was able to mastermind across the line, that agreement has led to further challenges, and this is another challenge where the respondent is being sought by authorities in the north, emanating from a prosecution, and the argument would be that this is a prosecution that was instigated by the British intelligence services through a double agent, but that, I suppose that's more of an issue for the defence in due course. But if there was to be a conviction and a sentence, the ramifications of licensing and those licences for citizens that do not actually reside or domicile at north of the border.
I see. Right, okay.
And is that compatible with Bunreacht and the Heron? Is it compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights? So it's an interesting case.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And it will have, well, either way, before the judgment, it's had implications in terms of ongoing extraditions from EU member states to the UK.
Okay. Wow, one to watch, definitely. So we'll probably have this out after that, but that's early October.
That's in for here in a 2-day hearing in early October.
Very good. Okay.
So things are starting to speed up quite rapidly, and there's a lot of cases in now. One in particular is a retrial. I suppose it would be inappropriate to elaborate any further on it because it is a retrial and it is coming up. But it's there's a lot of criminal cases coming up at the minute, and I suppose I'm sitting counting them down in my head here. And the reason I'm doing that is and it all comes back to the first week of term and the strike.
And the third.
And we just don't know what way things are going to go.
Yeah, that'll impact.
No, so cases are listed, practitioners are prepared for it, and we don't know what way things are going to go. It's most unfortunate that it has come to the withdrawal of services.
But I think there's no other options at the moment.
Look, it really is the last decision that people were wanting to go down this route. Like, the last thing that any criminal defence practitioner wants to do is to stand outside the doors of court and not carry out their duties and their functions for their clients. Like, nobody wants that.
No.
Nobody wants it, but unfortunately, and I can only speak for my own experience here, as a solicitor. Like, I'm not at the bar. The bar have, and rightfully, the bar have taken the decision to withdraw services.
So, just for listeners, this is in respect of the criminal legal aid scheme.
Yeah. So unlike the north, in the south, you have the criminal legal aid scheme, which would be for the district courts and the superior courts. You would then have the legal aid custody issue scheme, which would deal with ad hoc matters, and that again has all its own flaws. That is not subject to the strike. The strike, as people have been calling it, I've been referring to it as withdrawal of services, but the industrial action that is due to take place on the 3rd of October. It initially started out as a result of junior barristers spearheading a campaign because of the lack of reasonable remuneration. And you're talking, when you're looking at the fees, a fee would come in and you're talking in around €50 for an appearance.
It's unbelievable.
And for someone like me who's a sole practitioner, I rely on the goodwill of junior barristers, and you'd be splitting that fee. But like, I have fees outstanding for 3 years, so I can't pay it. You can't pay the barrister, and it's just like
it's awful.
A common sense approach in terms of this day and age, as opposed to having to. And I think it's purposeful. It's purposely intentional obstruction, where when a case finishes, I have to fill in a paper form and send it to the individual registrar. That registrar has to tick it off whether it's correct or not, and then that registrar sends it to Killarney, which is a section of the Department of Justice, and then payment in theory should proceed.
And
but sure,
such
it
a nightmare.
No, I carried out a review in our own office, and there was substantial monies outstanding over the course of 3 years.
And you have been engaging with the department over this. And I know we had Darren Lawler, who is one of the barristers who have been very active around this issue from the barristers' perspectives on, and it's still ongoing. So this isn't the first strike action. This is...
No, it's not the first strike action. And even well before the strike action, it's not as if this just came as a bolt out of the blue.
Yeah, it's been ongoing.
No, this goes right back to the Celtic Tiger days and the slashing of legal aid. And I suppose lawyers were viewed as fair game back then, and legal aid was substantially cut.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you weigh up those cuts, coupled with the rising costs, and where we are today, so the legal aid as it is at present is over 20 years old. Those fees are based on figures 20 years ago. And then they've been slashed by the guts of 40-50%. So it's outrageous.
Unbelievable.
I know. And one thing's for sure, you can bet your bottom dollar that those officials in the Department of Justice are not sitting on 20-year-old fees that have been slashed by 50%. No. But it just seems to be fair game.
For solicitors.
Solicitors are, and it's much more. Take the practitioners out of it. No, in the criminal courts, you have some of the most vulnerable and marginalised people that comes before the courts. Some of them may have addiction issues, some of them may have mental health issues, and we're the cold face of the people who engage with those to ensure we extract the best instructions and to ensure that their best interests are protected. And we are expected to do that for absolute pittance.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And I think that gives an insight of governments think of citizens of the state. So it's much bigger than just...
It's a bigger picture.
It is, and it can't be sort of pigeonholed. These are barristers out for trying to get more money, and sure they're all fat cat lawyers, and it's far from it. It couldn't be anything farther from the truth. And it's much more than just the district courts. The district courts put it into context in terms of the minuscule amounts that are expected to be paid. Like, my issue is, and I've made numerous representations to the Department of Justice, which have all been ignored, and I ended up having to write to the Minister, who was too busy to meet, and said that the department will get back to my correspondence. That was a month or two ago. I'm still waiting on a reply.
Yeah.
But even those horrendous fees, they're still not being paid when you put in your bills.
So you're not even getting them.
That's the issue. And
so there's a huge impact there across the board. I mean, not
you phone the
say.
Department of Justice, you can't get speaking to anyone. You email them, you'd be lucky to get a response. And in terms of the superior court cases then, so like that case that we were touching on, that I would rather not name, that's a substantial case involving millions, and I mean in excess of 8 million documents, to include financial documents, extradition documents, and that's just the prosecution papers. Then you have the defence papers, so papers that we may have sought by way of subject access requests and clients' instructions, and that's in excess of 2 million. So we're roughly 10 million pages, and that's split between the legal team, and we're trying to prepare for a trial. And it's bad when you have to write off continuously to the department, are we going to be paid for the preparation of this case? Because at the back of your head is, look, there's an accused person. There's an accused person that, they want their case to be prepared for, and adequately prepared for, and rightly so. And there's the ripple effect of him preparing for his case and his family and whatnot. And you get a response back going, look, they've had previous representation, or other lawyers have been paid for this some years ago.
So why should you get paid again?
So why should you get paid?
For your time.
And sure, if it's relevant, and it was as bold as this, if it's relevant, sure, your client can review and tell you what is relevant.
Wow.
No, so asking the accused to carry out a review of disclosure and to come back to senior and junior counsel and solicitor and go, I think this is relevant. Yeah. This is an issue that has been arising, and it's been getting worse year on end. And it's not just this government, it's successive governments. It's happened over different generations, and it needs to come to an end if we really value our criminal justice system. No, we're talking about Ireland being one of the worst countries in Europe when it comes to legal aid assistance.
It's awful.
Well, like, if you go back to the start of the podcast, you were asking, why did you want to get into law? And I was saying about, like, I used to see these diagrams and cartoons, and I was intrigued by this, and I wanted to speak out for people that have fallen foul of the law that was there to protect them. When I started out, I was gravitating towards becoming a barrister. No, but the fact is, I wouldn't be from an affluent background.
Yeah.
No, for a barrister to start out self-employed, no, this sort of key skills that certainly the Institute didn't teach me when I was there at Queen's, and I don't believe the Blackhall nor King's Inns teach practitioners how to operate a business successfully as being self-employed.
Yeah.
No, they'll teach you how to be a lawyer. So these are things that you have to pick up as you go along, and unless you have that safety net of the bank of mummy and daddy to fall back on, then no, there's all these economic barriers, and that's just society as it is at the minute. But that coupled with the fact that you could be highly successful in terms of busy junior barrister, but the reality is you may not get paid for any of that work.
It's really abysmal at this stage. Well, the campaign's been ongoing for a while, and we certainly will follow it on Activist Lawyer. It's the 3rd of October is a withdrawal of services, and you're involved in that.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly not be participating in any cases involving the criminal legal aid scheme on that day.
Okay.
But from my perspective, and the bigger issues with the criminal justice system, it is not just criminal legal aid. No, parole board hearings. Parole boards are a new thing in the south of Ireland. It's now those hearings are now on a statutory set, and there's minimal legal aid in place, but it doesn't cover consultations, the preparatory works, and it doesn't even cover travel. So I've had these issues with the parole board where they were expecting me to travel 2 hours down the road to do a hearing that may have gone into a second day. And maybe rather naively I asked, and it was only because I did one previously and I wasn't paid, I asked her, can you just confirm that we'll be paid? And I just should say the going legal aid rate for solicitors' travel is 24 cents a kilometre based on 20-year-old fees. So you wouldn't break even in terms of your diesel. Not that anyone else in the civil service or the government would be getting 24 cents a kilometre. No. But they came back and said, no, there's no remuneration for solicitors' expenses or preparatory works. So your photocopying, your consultations, your travel, none of that's covered. I said, well, that's not. I don't think that's on. But look, in the circumstances, because you don't want to deviate from the real issue. And the real issue is there's a parole hearing, and there's a client, and you want to act in their best interest. Can this be listed as a remote hearing? No, that wouldn't be in the interest of justice. Well, that's rather contradictory given the legislation that was brought in during the course of the COVID pandemic, and which facilitated remote hearings. So that's the obstacles that you're hitting continuously on a daily basis.
It really takes away from the real work.
And like one other case there recently, we brought a judicial review application for a prisoner who was not, in our view, was not receiving adequate medical treatment, and we subsequently had a doctor examine him and who raised issues in respect to how the prison service were facilitating medical treatment, and in particular the concerns with concussion injuries, where they should be scanned, they should be brought out to hospital. Handing someone a couple of painkillers and sent them back to the room wasn't suffice, it wasn't appropriate, and it wasn't in line with medical best practice. Fell on deaf ears. We had to reluctantly issue proceedings, brought it to the court, which ultimately resolved it then. But we sought a recommendation from the court under the ad hoc custody issue scheme. And the custody issue scheme is in place essentially to deal with those who are deprived of their liberty. And to ensure that their interests and their human rights and constitutional rights are not breached. So we got the recommendation from the court for solicitor, junior and senior counsel, and I've recently got a letter back, what you're talking, a year later, when I'm chasing up the fees from the legal aid board to say, no, we're not paying you in that. We don't believe this falls within the category of the legal aid scheme. So that's the daily battles that you're hitting. God. And then there's only so long that any business can operate like that.
Absolutely, you can't chase your tail like that.
And this is the issue that I've had with the Minister, though the goodwill of human rights practitioners has now come to a close in my view. It's insustainable. I can't go back to the bank and go, look, would you give me a bigger overdraft because I have this great case? No, well,
because you have no faith in it.
No, if there's no realistic prospect of being paid for the work that you're doing, then you have to reevaluate the work that you're doing, and who's ultimately going to lose out then?
So, Ciarán, there's a few test cases that you're involved in. Again, your experience of working in both jurisdictions will prove relevant here.
Coming from working in Belfast, where over the course of the last load of years, particularly since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, there has been so much reform in terms of policing and accountability.
Yeah.
And witnessing that, now, albeit it has its flaws, it has its issues in the north, but it's light years ahead of where we're at in the south.
Really?
It really is, and we're in my view, where any criticism of An Garda Síochána is viewed as an attack on the state itself.
Okay.
So they put it into perspective. If you're an ordinary citizen, whether it's in Dundalk or whether it's in Dublin or Cork, south of the border, and you wish to bring a judicial review application, like, you don't have access to the same civil legal aid as what you would have in the north. So in terms of challenging the state and holding the state to accountability, those mechanisms are not there, and society's not used to having those mechanisms. In terms of policing accountability, where you would have the police ombudsman in the north, you wouldn't have anywhere near that in the south. You have GSOC, which is An Garda Síochána as ombudsman, but it's not worth even talking about, and I don't say that just as a passing remark. It is absolutely feeble, and what they're doing is they're just letting down the most vulnerable people that come into contact with the law that may have a very valid grievance, and they're dealing with a supposed watchdog that just lacks any form of independence or any form of impartiality. Wow. And a total lack of a statutory setting with investigative powers. And so there seems to be that we'll just put this veneer of accountability on, and all these veneers of accountability it's always after an inquiry or a tribunal, and then we'll move on to the next crisis. So coming back to the FOI, that's a state case. So it all originates from the provisions within the Freedom of Information Act. So if a practitioner or a law student's listening to this podcast, and whether they're from Belfast or Brussels or wherever they are within Europe, they generally can go online and they can go and look for statistics in terms of policing. And one of those statistics will be, say, police stop and searches in respect to vulnerable groups or minority groups. And that those statistics are not available for An Garda Síochána. And I was noticing not only a rise, but I was deeply concerned with the amount of clients contacting the office in terms of stop and searches, and how those stop and searches were being conducted and carried out. So I made a Freedom of Information request, and I was concerned with the volume of stop and searches of members of the Irish travelling community in Dundalk, and so also members of the black community, but also members of Eastern European communities in and around the Blanchardstown Unger district. I think it's the K district, the Guards refer to it as, in Dublin. And the reason I thought that those statistics were important was I wanted to show, look, it's clearly there's a profiling here. Yeah. There's clearly been a systematic discriminatory direction from your superiors. But how do you establish that without the statistics? And made a Freedom of Information request. Look, it was just knocked back at the first instance. Sought a review upon that decision, and outlined the legislation in terms of my view of what the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act were. I made reference to Oireachtas committee meetings, so similar to Hansard minutes in the UK, where we're sort of outlining, like, this was the rationale behind this legislation. So it's a proportionate that you share this, and it would have been within the spirit of the legislation, but no, like, wow. And again, we were left with no alternative but to seek a case straight to the High Court. But that's again, incredible. That's a case. But it's a case, and it's a case with significant public importance. It will have. And again, all pro bono. No, there's no payment in this. No, there's no legal aid provision for it. So in terms of exploring the law, testing the law, holding the state to account, you're at the mercy and the goodwill of practitioners. And I don't think
I
that's
just
right.
can't.
I don't
I'm
think
just
that's right.
shaking my head here in complete disbelief, although obviously I've heard similar issues before, even with guests that have been on this podcast, but it absolutely is. It's incredible that that's where we're at. It really is.
Well, just on that particular FOI issue and discriminatory policing, I was successful, which to my surprise, with one FOI with the guards, and that was I focused on the training in which members of An Garda Síochána would receive dealing with vulnerable adults, so adults with mental health difficulties or children, and who would be on searches.
Okay.
So if the guards are searching a particular property, my issue was that the guards, there was a trend at that particular time when guards were searching houses, which they openly knew there was young occupants within the house and there was vulnerable people within the house. But they went in with semi-automatic rifles, wearing boiler suits, having balaclavas. I said, look, where is your risk assessment? How was this carried out? How was this deemed appropriate? And then cable tags were used on the children.
Oh my goodness.
And I sought an FOI to find out, look, can you please tell me and clarify what training? So that was refused. I sought a review, and only after the review, pretty much, in so many words, came back and said, there is no training. No, so that's where we're at with policing. And policing in Ireland at the minute, and look, it just seems to be one issue after the other within the justice portfolio at the minute. And look, I certainly have sympathy for the Justice Minister, because it's not something that's happened overnight. These are cultural and crises that have been there for many a generation, and it's been inherited. But things need to change.
Absolutely.
And they need to change rapidly, because all we're doing is kicking the can down the road. And when you're kicking the can down the road like that, it creates the perfect environment for miscarriages of justice to take place.
So we spoke about a few interesting cases that you're working on that demonstrate, I suppose, an air of indifference around policing and responsibilities. One involved the dangerous dogs legislation, which is quite relevant given what is happening in the UK at the minute around the bully XL dogs.
So it's a judicial review application, but within that judicial review, we're actually testing the constitutionality of the dangerous dogs legislation in Ireland, and its compatibility with the European Convention on Human Rights and Bunreacht na Héireann. But it also looks at the roles to investigate. And what I mean by that is, so this is a case where a young vulnerable child had his face mauled a couple of days before Christmas, had to undergo emergency surgery, and the mother, rightfully so, complaint to the guards. I was getting nowhere. I made a complaint to the local authority, and again that was getting nowhere. So I was making representations to the authorities, and the guards were of the opinion that, look, this is an authority matter. This is to be
for the council.
So when I say a local authority, it's what you would say in the council in the north. So Newry and Mourne Council or Belfast City Council would be the local authority that would have to be dealing with this. It would be their role to deal with matters of this nature. When you were liaising with the local authority, they were of the opinion, well, look, this happened in private property, so our provisions don't extend to private property. So we're in this state of limbo. We're going, well, look at the injuries. They speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, what are you going to do about it? The hearing will take place. Of that, we have no doubt. Now, I'm surprised that the hearing is proceeding in circumstances where the Attorney General has issued guidelines on dealing with dangerous dogs, which would sort of corroborate what we're arguing.
Oh, okay.
But then again, I'm not actually. I am surprised and I'm not surprised. We're also dealing with legislation in the south in which the Attorney General's office has issued a pamphlet and 15 principles, which should be adopted by the state if there's any litigation. We're talking about duties of candour, operating with integrity and dealing with things in a cost-effective, efficient manner. Which would be great. No, I read it and was delighted.
Yeah.
I was going, and then I'm involved in a test case legacy case before the Judicial Review Court in the south. I wrote off then to the Chief State Solicitor's office asking, well, look, in light of the aforementioned, are we going to anticipate some form of discovery, or we're going to sit down at the table and discuss this? But like, I'm still waiting on a reply. Just on that, I think there's an issue with my post, because I don't get a response to a lot of my letters.
There must be something
There must
wrong.
be an issue.
You need to
There's
phone up on post.
I-
There's something going on there. It's like, it's fair to say, I mean, every day brings something else across your desk. I'd say it's just a very mixed bag.
Well,
I hate to refer to it like that, but
look, a lot of our work is throughout the 26 counties of the jurisdiction. So it's, we've cases in Galway, we've cases in Cork. But like the majority of it would be in and around the Eastern District, so from Dublin up to Dundalk, and Dundalk is a very, it's a very diverse town, and like Dundalk wasn't immune from the Troubles.
It was not. No,
it certainly wasn't. No, it was a town that offered sanctuary from the pilgrims in Belfast for refugees in the 20s and again in the 60s and 70s.
And those cases are still ongoing, aren't they? Like, well,
they are. Like I've a case there brought by a client, Dominic McGlinchey, and that young man witnessed both his parents being murdered in front of him. Initially, it started with his mother in Dundalk when she was bathing both him and his elder brother, where gunmen kicked in the back door and executed his mother in front of them in horrendous circumstances.
Oh my God.
Absolutely horrendous circumstances. And then you fast forward a couple of years later, when his father stopped the car that they were travelling in Drogheda. Dominic was getting out of the car to go into the local sweet shop to get the tape for the night. Back in the day when there was no Netflix and you had to go in and get your tape, and witnessed his father being gunned down in a phone box, and you're talking about victims and survivors of our troubled past. Absolutely no access to justice, no truth-seeking mechanisms, like talking about ostracised and left to your own device. And these are the difficult conversations that not only lawyers but society as a whole need to have when it comes from the top down, and when the government want to bury their head in the sand. And the Irish government, they're great at going to Europe, and they're great at going to Washington and pointing the fingers in recent years at London. And even recently in respect to the Legacies Bill that the Tory government railroaded through. And clearly there's a multitude of flaws within that legislation. But how insincere it is for the Irish government to raise issues with that when they have no access to justice. There is no legal
within their own that jurisdiction. Which we don't really think about as much because we're here talking about the Legacy Bill. And
there was, I think it was the Victims Commissioner recently in the North carried out a survey, and the outcome of it was that it was like 1 in 10 citizens south of the border fell within the category of a victim of the Troubles. That's huge, given that the population is bigger than the North. But even in Dundalk, there's the Cane Project. I think it was overseen by the University of Ulster. They had it down that there's 15 unsolved murders in the Greater Dundalk area.
Wow.
No,
Unbelievable.
so look, people in Dundalk have suffered similar to what people have at the north of the border. But do not have anywhere near the same avenues of redress or access to truth and justice. And that McGlinchey case just, it blew me away from the outset, because when I sat down with Dominic McGlinchey, we decided, well look, first things first, there was an inquest. Let's write off and we'll get a copy of the papers. We only got a full set of the papers from the coroner after a judicial review, which dragged over numerous months.
My goodness.
So in terms of the state acting with integrity, operating within the law, that just didn't happen. 10, 20 yards from my office, the loyalists bombed the bar. There were several people killed in it. Though those people haven't got justice to the day. Now, injustice comes in all its forms. Justice mightn't necessarily mean prosecutions or convictions, but people are entitled to truth. And I think we have to have a very serious conversation, and the Irish state need to stand up and be counted for it, because it's one thing going up to Belfast and agreeing to the terms of the Good Friday Agreement and every agreement thereafter.
Yeah, you're right.
And going on the world stage and saying, look, we operate as co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, but then when it comes to when it comes to governing,
Yeah.
and it comes to dealing with a legacy in your own jurisdiction, not acting within the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. And that's exactly what I think has happened in the case, the McGlinchey case, where detectives who are now retired, who are openly confirmed on the record with journalists, I think the Sindo ran a piece on it, that the file in the case of Mary McGlinchey had been missing, and it was brought to the attention of the Garda Commissioner way back in 2015. Like the McGlinchey and McNeil families, they were never made aware of it until the journalists phoned them in recent years.
That's unbelievable.
Like, let's just talk about the lack of compassion and re-traumatising people. And then again, and I know I keep coming back to the same point, no legal aid for people to bring these type of cases. So someone who has witnessed what they have witnessed and now are seeking the most basic of answers, answers that should be freely handed out, not only because of the obligations under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, but also because of the impact of the EU Victims Directive that the Irish government brought into domestic law in 2015. There's a positive obligation to liaise and engage with families, let them know how the investigative process was carried out, where they went, did they have any leads, what they're doing. But in this particular case, they've lost the file to his mother, and they've yet to confirm that. And he has had no choice or alternative but to bring high court litigation, which renders him quite vulnerable then to costs.
Yeah. My goodness. That is absolutely incredible.
So you've had some really interesting articles published primarily around miscarriages of justice, and you provide some of your own kind of profound insights into the impact of miscarriages of justice, the societal impact of such occurrences. And one of your articles draws comparisons between very well-known cases. One refers to the Stephen Avery case. I think that's the one that the Netflix documentary covered some time ago. Why is it important to you to talk about this issue?
That was a piece that I wrote some time ago after Jerry Conlon passed away.
That's right, yeah.
And Jerry Conlon was a great advocate, and was very outspoken in injustices in all its forms, which rendered him as fair game to the red rags. But in that particular article, I was discussing the case of the Craigavon 2.
Yeah.
And I would have been involved. Jerry Conlon asked me to help out with the Craigavon 2 case, and what I was discussing then in that particular case was all the circumstantial evidence and the issues within the case, and how I believed it was an unsafe conviction, but also while in my view there was unsafe convictions, and that was in the north at the time.
Yeah.
No, the same week they had, and there was an attorney that was involved in the making a murder.
That's right. He was
over
Yeah.
in Crumlin Road prison.
That's right.
And all the great and the good of the legal profession in the north were all there in their black ties. No, this is horrendous. This is terrible. No, we're just so glad all them days are gone. And I don't think you can ever take your eye off injustice.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you can sign an agreement and then injustice is in the past.
Yeah.
You have to be very alive that injustice can happen, and it can happen in different ways, in different formats. Because if you get complacent about it, innocent people can go to jail.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I think a lot of people have got into that position that, well, look, it's 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement. Everything's hunky-dory now. And I guess things are much better in terms of the optics.
Yeah.
But look at the injustice of the north. Look at the injustice of the island as a whole.
Yeah.
Vast inequality. Significant statistics in terms of homelessness, of children sleeping on the streets, of the use of food banks. To such an extent that I can't remember growing up in West Belfast that would have had its problems and its social and economic problems in the 80s and 90s, and people absolutely dependent on food banks. But that's part and parcel of the day.
It is,
now.
yeah.
And it's not only those who are in receipt of social welfare payments. No, you have people that are working as nurses in the Royal Hospital, carrying out the most difficult of jobs, busted their guts during the course of a global pandemic, and they're queuing up for a food parcel. I think when we've got to that stage, No, things we've definitely done something wrong.
We have. It's
And
completely broken down.
what do we do in response? We give them a wee clap.
Yeah.
So I suppose answering your question, I think we have to always be alert to injustice. And in my view, injustice is always there, it's always around us.
Yeah.
And if we don't speak up and proactively speak up about it, we can quite quickly become complacent.
Yeah.
And becoming complacent allows injustice to accelerate. And when injustice accelerates, hatred accelerates. And you can see that with some of the cases as well that I've been involved in recently. How people can you can really see a dark side to people.
Yeah.
And I suppose the internet and social media have actually brought those people into the mainstream as such. So we've always had those people about.
But now,
but you could ignore them quite easily. But now they can get into your computer and they can get their message out through all the different social media outlets.
And even, I mean, you're looking at the government, I mean, like leading in, I suppose, from your answer there, looking at how, and we've talked about this at length in this podcast, the UK government in particular attack lawyers and, you know, use derogatory slurs against lawyers, you know, using them as scapegoats. You've already mentioned earlier on just about, you know, people working in a profession, fat cat lawyers, ambulance chasers, all of this. I'm just wondering about that level of abuse. And you've said as well, just from quoting you here, all lawyers and human rights activists must rise above the parapet and make stands against injustices in all their forms, from the destruction of legal aid, which we've spoken about, and the obliteration of the National Health Service, to serious miscarriages of justice. So just, I suppose, the question we ask a lot of our guests, based on that, how does activism work within the law or with the law, in your opinion? And how do we, you know, make change?
Well, I suppose it goes back to the basics of it and being a lawyer. And when you're a lawyer, you're acting on your client's instructions to the best of your ability, without fear or favour.
Yeah.
And that's something that that's the approach that I always take. And you know what, sometimes it's not a popular approach. And that's the thing with a lawyer, you will be vulnerable at times.
Yeah.
Look, and I have fallen foul of threats and abuse. But when it becomes the norm that it's accepted that solicitors are fair game, I think that is seriously concerning. And this is an issue that it's raised its head again in a case that I'm involved in the High Court, where a mother of a young man who took his own life has brought a case against the Irish Light, which is a right-wing conspiracy theorist outlet. And you know what, look, we live in a democracy. People are entitled to air their views, but it should be done. It should be done on a respectful platform, and mindful of that message. So there's a balance that has to be reached. But when someone purposely, in my view, and maliciously redistributes an image of that deceased young man and tries to connect it to the COVID pandemic, and the mother said, "Look, can you please remove these?"
So that's what happened.
And
it was
doesn't.
right.
So that's the case of Campbell and O'Doherty before the High Court. But when the defendant to those proceedings then views the solicitor and the legal team as an extension of the client, and then that's myself in the office is viewed as an extension of the client and are subject to file abuse online, on videos posted online, and numerous posts where it's been calling for the execution. Though you're not an Irish patriot, the sort of ugliness that you would have associated in recent years with politics in America, and you're seeing that at face value where they're calling for the execution of a solicitor.
Wow.
And you're coming from a jurisdiction, and even in my lifetime, where solicitors have been attacked, have been hurt, have been killed, all because people thought that solicitors not only were an extension of their client, but because of the cases that we're involved in, they were fair game. Now, my biggest issue with that and the threats that were sustained and attracted by my office, because look, I have a duty of care, obviously, to my office and my staff. Because the work they do it's incredibly demanding anyway, but they add this to it. No, it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
It just plainly shouldn't happen. But when you raise issues like this with the Law Society, and it's right, sure, we'll get back to you. Now, I must say I was very disappointed and incredibly upset, and I'm still waiting a substantive response from them.
My goodness.
Because like we're not talking that long ago when Pat Finucane was assassinated in his home having his dinner with his family, or when Rosemary Nelson was subject to an assassination on her way to work. Like this is the reality of the work we do as human rights lawyers, and if there's no protections in place for lawyers and human rights lawyers, well, who is going to be protecting those individuals who are getting their rights deprived or breached? So look, it's a sad state of affairs. I'd probably say that the law society don't know what to say, because they probably wouldn't be. Now, you could say they wouldn't be used to the same hostilities of what practitioners would have to be subjected to and to go through in the north. But you only have to Google search to see some of the abuse that has been directed to solicitors in the south.
Yeah.
And I for one, don't think it's appropriate.
No.
I don't think that it's appropriate for solicitors to be viewed as an extension of their clients, a fair game, or that politicians feel it's appropriate to do it. No,
and they continue to do it, no matter.
Look, the Law Society in England have been very focal on that.
They have been. I was going to say that. They've just recently released a statement about it.
There's a report there recently that I was reading that was compiled by Justice, the NGO
That's
in the
right,
UK,
yeah.
and they're referring to the GOA declaration with Commonwealth lawyers. And it really is the basics in terms of the impartiality of the judiciary and solicitors. And it's not appropriate to attack them in that way. Like, obviously, we're not immune to abuse. We're not immune to making mistakes. No, and I think it's. I have no difficulty with someone saying, look, the manner in which Ciarán was asking them questions in court or the litigation. No, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can become personal. You're losing sight of the case, the message, the challenge, the legalities of it, and you're focusing on the individual. And that's a very dangerous place to be. And if you go back to the time before Pat Finucane was killed, no, you could see where these things were going.
Yeah.
The members of Parliament were openly abusing their parliamentary privilege and putting a mark in people's backs. No, how could you sit back then and go, how the hell did this happen? Of course it was going to happen. No, the indicators were there to go and do it, and then to deny the family access to the truth for generations thereafter. So look, I'm not the same person who I was when I started out in the legal profession, though. You were still, obviously you like to think you still have a bit of energy in you, but you were full of energy, maybe a bit more naive, and everything was so exciting. No, you're a bit more pragmatic now, but you also, because life and the path life takes you on, you've much more responsibilities.
Sure.
No, you have a family, and that shouldn't be something that comes to your own door.
No, it should not. Well, I hope you get some kind of response and the support needed around that. Unfortunately, it's happening all too often, as you say, across Ireland, the UK, everywhere. But just our final question, I suppose, you've got a huge workload there in front of you, and you've given us such really detailed insight into your work. It's been really fantastic. What would you say to somebody who wanted to follow in your footsteps and wanted to practice in your areas of expertise? How would they get into it? Would you recommend it?
I tell them to go and get their head examined. Yeah, there's easier ways to make.
I knew you'd say something like that.
There's easier ways to make a few quid. If I was able to go back in time, I'd be a yoga teacher out in Connemara.
Lovely.
No, yoga as Gaelica. Imagine that would be a lovely.
What would you do? You would crack up.
I say that. Look, I say that.
Yeah.
I would drive me demented. You know, I have a drive every day, and look, when you love your job, it's half the battle.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get into this game to be a millionaire or to make huge money. Obviously, it's nice to make a living.
Sure.
And it's only appropriate that solicitors receive reasonable remuneration. No, I got into this game to help the most vulnerable, to help the people that couldn't help themselves. And look, yeah, I did get into it with the objective of trying to change the law, and you can't do that with the right representation and with the relevant case. Yeah. And you can't make society a better place. So if, look, whether it's a young person or whether it's someone going back to the education and someone came to me and said, look, Ciarán, I would really like to be a human rights lawyer, absolutely, I would encourage it. I certainly wouldn't talk it down. It's a great job, it's a noble job, and you can get a lot out of it. So I would encourage it, but look, it's a difficult path. Yeah. It comes with its challenges. and it's incredibly demanding at times. But look, if you're sincere and honest to that and you follow it, the rewards you will reap in return, it's paramount.
Yeah. Well, Ciarán Mulholland, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure. It really has. And I wish you all the best. We'll keep an eye on your cases there as well. And if anyone wants to follow, you've got your website, a really great website set up, and I suppose you'll,
I'd say the girl that looks after the website and the social media, she'll be delighted to hear that.
I've been on it.
Because she's probably used to me about going on to her, about reminding her of the restraints and constraints of the solicitors' regulations and everything in between. But look, I suppose law offices have changed dramatically over the years.
Absolutely.
And more so since COVID. So having a social media presence to ensure that rights are known and messages get out there, I think it's a very, very
important. It really is.
So yes, we have, we're on social media. I believe that's at Law Mulholland. And then it's the website's mulhollandlaw.ie.
Great, we'll check that out. Thank you everybody for joining us today.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service, where our team using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.